virtual edition of the Gun Guy Show. We hope you're here with us on Facebook Live. Sorry I couldn't do the regular show as far as being on WIBC. And by the way, I'm getting different notifications on here, so this is one of the first times I've done a Facebook Live, certainly from my office. So forgive me if I'm a little distracted as Facebook's throwing a bunch of stuff at me. But at any rate, I'm sorry I couldn't do the regular radio show. We've got IHSAA basketball going on this afternoon. As I said on Facebook, as Hoosiers, we love our basketball, so I can't complain too much at all about WIBC's priorities. But this is an important week, and I really refuse to not address listeners in some capacity and to let folks know really what happened this last week and how important it's been for gun owners here in Indiana. And finally, after a long battle, I was talking to some folks like Ben Smaltz and Jim Lucas and Jerry Torr here over the last week, and we went back, and it's been a 10-year battle to get constitutional carry passed in Indiana. And we really finally just got it done on Monday when Governor Eric Holcomb signed what was originally House Bill and then House Enrolled Act 1296. Once he signed it, that's it. It goes into effect July 1 of this year, and Indiana then becomes the 24th constitutional carry state. And I wanted to come on and really give people some perspective on what this battle has looked like. You know, I talk about it on the show all the time. If you're a listener of WIBC, I'm sure that you've heard that discussion. But man, it goes back a long way. It literally has been a 10-year fight. And we introduced some bills literally 10 years ago. Jim Lucas is the guy who was out front on that. Representative Jim Lucas from District 69 in Seymour, good friend of mine, and a true hero of the Second Amendment, along with Ben Smaltz from Auburn, who's the author of this bill that we finally got passed into law this year, and many others in both the House of Representatives and in the Senate. But, 10 years ago, we started this and introduced a bill that didn't really get much attention and fought for it, didn't get a hearing, introduced it again. We were really being ignored primarily by Republican leadership. And then we thought we had a breakthrough in 2017. We had a bill, a constitutional carry bill, that got assigned to what they call summer study. And a lot of people say that summer study is sort of where bills go to die. And that has been true in the past to some degree. What's summer study? Well, you form a joint committee of both members of the House and the Senate, and they go and over the summer they can have hearings, they can bring in evidence, they can have experts, they can do whatever it is that they want to do to study the issue before them and then make a recommendation to the General Assembly the next year. And that's what we got done in 2017. And we had so many people. I was on social media, and we had all these people on social media going, oh, well, the Republican leadership just wants to kill this. They'll never let this pass. They just sent it to summer study so they can look like they're doing something and not really do anything with it. And I'm in there being my usual naively optimistic self, saying, no, we're going to have this great hearing, and we're going to put on all the evidence it's going to take to convince legislators that this is something that Indiana ought to adopt, like several other states had already done by then in 2017. And so we had this great hearing, and there were hours and hours and hours of testimony back in 2017 on summer study. And I testified twice in two different hearings where they had live testimony. These went on for multiple hours. There was probably in three hearings, it's probably 20 hours if I had to guess. And people came in and opposed it. People came in and testified for it. I was in there fighting for it along with a lot of other folks. Then we had from NRA, Dr. Chris Kopacki, who was our state representative assigned to Indiana. And he's a rock star. He had his ducks in a row, as he always has. He was in there fighting for us, but many other people, and people who had a lot of information on the fact that, in fact, constitutional carry doesn't do any of the things that the opponents have always said it does. It doesn't increase crime. It doesn't endanger police officers. It doesn't do anything other than return constitutional rights to private citizens who are law-abiding citizens. And that's all it's ever done. That's all it's ever done in the jurisdictions where it's been passed. And that's exactly what that we presented, and with a lot of evidence, a lot of data, a lot of support in 2017. And in 2017, we got a recommendation after the Summer Study Committee pondered all the evidence that came in. They deliberated. They came out with a recommendation to remove barriers. This is a quote: to remove barriers, law-abiding citizens carrying a handgun in Indiana. And that sounded pretty much like adopting constitutional carry to me. And it did to a whole lot of other people. In fact, there were Democrats in there on this joint committee made up of the Judiciary Committee from both the House and the Senate. And a whole bunch of people in there, some Democrats raised their hand and said, hold on, this sounds like we're recommending constitutional carry. And we all looked at each other and said, yeah, it pretty much does. So we felt really good about the next year. Went into the next year, we had multiple constitutional carry bills that were filed, one by Jim Lucas, one by Ben Smaltz, in the Public Policy Committee, chaired by Representative Ben Smaltz, got a hearing. And that's the first step. That's something we never had before. Never had the opportunity to go in and fight for constitutional carry at a committee hearing. And we're excited about that. And then lo and behold, this is 2018 session, after we got this great recommendation out of Summer Study, the night before the hearing, Republican leadership decided to strip constitutional carry entirely out of that bill, insert something entirely different, and have a hearing on the different bill. And I found out about that about 10 p.m. the night before the hearing. I still showed up. I still testified and talked about why it is that we were all very disappointed in that. And it was clear that Republican leadership, primarily in the House, in the form of Speaker Brian Bosma, just simply didn't want the bill to go forward. And it was frustrating. It made me borderline angry. I wrote a very terse article on WIBC that said Republican leadership kills constitutional carry again, and I put it squarely in the lap of then Speaker Brian Bosma, who I've known for a long time. I used to practice law with Brian Bosma. We were at the same law firm 30-some years ago, right out of law school, and used to socialize to some degree while we were at the same law firm. And I like Brian Bosma. I have a lot of respect for him. But it was clear that he wasn't supporting constitutional carry, and that was a problem. Okay, so over the next couple of legislative sessions, what happens? Brian Bosma decides to not run for re-election. We get Representative Todd Huston as Speaker of the House, and he's been very supportive of 2A issues in the House. Last year, we get a constitutional carry bill, gets a hearing in public policy in the House, sails through the House. Again, Representative Ben Smaltz's bill goes over to the Senate, where it gets assigned to the Judiciary Committee, chaired by one Liz Brown from Fort Wayne. And anybody who is in her district, please remember what she has done to us on constitutional issues, on Second Amendment issues in Fort Wayne. As a Republican, she has been our biggest enemy. She wouldn't give it a hearing last year. She killed it. This year, we get a great bill. We revised it from last year. We improved it from last year. Sails through the House. Goes over to the Senate. Liz Brown, for a long damn time, didn't want to give it a hearing. In the meantime, there's another constitutional carry bill introduced by Senator Jim Toms, longtime Second Amendment proponent, longtime Second Amendment hero, wrote some of the most important Second Amendment legislation we have in Indiana, including our Preemption Act, which I won't go into right now. Liz Brown insists on being a co-author of that bill in the Senate. It's assigned to her committee. We're thinking, well, okay, this sounds pretty good. We go in there and we have a hearing over hours and hours and hours. A ton of people testify. She refuses to give it a vote. She's a co-author on the bill. She refuses to give it a vote. Okay. Well, then the pressure starts being put upon her, and a lot of this came from the 2A Project, the group that I founded. I hope a lot of you are members of that and have supported us through those efforts. But a lot of pressure gets put on her to hear the bill that actually passed the House. Representative Ben Smalt's bill goes over to her committee, and I think entirely because of pressure put on her, not only by grassroots, people like the 2A Project members, other people that called in, but as well by Senate leadership. And I really give Senator Rod Bray, the year before when constitutional carry bill, our bill that year died in the Senate, it was because Rod Bray didn't support it. And I was very critical of Senator Bray in that context. But I got to tell you, this year, when we go down the list, and I'm going to do this on this broadcast, when we go down the list of the people that we need to thank for having constitutional carry be the law of the land in Indiana in 2022, Senator Rod Bray is way at the top of the list. I mean, the folks on the ground fighting the fight were Representative Ben Smalls, Representative Jim Lucas, Representative Jerry Torr, Representative Peggy Mayfield. Over in the Senate, Representative Eric Cook, Representative Jim Tom, or excuse me, Senator Aaron Freeman, Senator Jim Toms. Senator Aaron Freeman was a rock star on the hearing when this went to the floor eventually, and I'll go through that. But the leadership in the form of Todd Huston, Speaker of the House, and Rod Bray this year, President Pro Tem of the Senate, that's why we got this done this year. This would not have happened without leadership. Rod Bray, Todd Huston, making sure it happened. Yeah, the folks on the ground, man, the infantry, fighting the fight, Ben Smaltz, Jim Lucas, as well as grassroots folks like myself, and our now this year, our state representative, John Weber, has been our representative the last 2 years, and he's great. He's a hard worker. Look, I've got my problems with NRA national leadership. I've declared I won't give a dime to NRA until Wayne LaPierre is out. I feel that way, and a lot of other people do too. It's one of the reasons I formed the 2A Project. But our state representatives, Dr. Chris Kopacki, now John Weber, they're rock stars. They're hard workers. So you need to separate out those folks that, like me, have an attitude about NRA. You need to remember NRA ILA. That's Institute for Legislative Action, including the people that have been on the ground here in Indiana fighting for your 2A rights. They've been rock stars. They work hard. They're here. They're present. They're in the General Assembly, and they do great things. And they definitely had a huge role in getting this passed this year. So we need to separate those things out when we're talking about NRA. But anyway, so this year, the people on the ground, yeah, we were all in there slugging, but leadership. President Pro Tem Rod Bray, Speaker of the House Todd Huston, they made it happen, and it wouldn't have happened but for their support, and we need to remember that. So after all that history, we're up to the point where Liz Brown kills the original constitutional carry bill, which was Ben Smaltz's bill, in her committee by getting two Republican senators, Mike Bohachik from Michigan City and Sue Glick from Angola, to vote along with all the Democrats and Liz Brown to gut constitutional carry completely out of the bill that they were considering in that committee and put something completely different in it. At that point, it's dead. Dead. Done. As far as that bill, it's over. But that's where leadership stepped in. Senator Rod Bray, Todd Huston, and the folks on the ground, and said, hold on, we're not going to let this happen this year. We're not going to let Liz Brown from Fort Wayne, man, people need to remember what she did to us on constitutional carry, not just this year, but last year too. And by the way, I'm not even done talking about her involvement. People said, no, we're not going to let her hijack this. We're not going to let her deprive this of a vote on the floor of the Senate. And at that point, they went out and found a different bill that was still alive. It had gotten through the House, gotten through the Senate, and they decided no, and the author of that bill graciously consented to allowing the content of that bill to be stripped out and constitutional carry to be inserted in. It was still alive because it had passed on the floor of the House. So the language was still alive. It gets inserted into that bill, has to go to conference committee. We get through that process. Then that goes to the floor of the House, goes to the floor of the Senate, all in one day. And it was debated on the floor of the Senate. It was debated on the floor of the House for quite a while too, hour or two. But then it goes over to the Senate later that day, and that hearing went well into the evening. It was past 9 p.m., I believe, and they finally took a vote. At least a 3-hour hearing. Senator Liz Brown went to the podium 3 different times to oppose this. Totally over the top. Gets passed in the Senate, 30-20. Now goes to the governor's desk. What's the likelihood of the governor signing it? That becomes a fascinating question. In the meantime, though, I really want to recap for you what it is we were dealing with, what I was dealing with, whether it was on social media or in the broadcast media. I do a lot of, not just what I do on WIBC, but I do a lot of TV stuff. People get a hold of me as the founder of the 2A Project. They want the pro 2A perspective on things. But all the arguments against constitutional carry that we had to deal with, I want to go through those a little bit. Somebody suggested, I need to be looking at comments, by the way, that are coming across. But somebody suggested we do sort of a top 10 arguments against constitutional carry and then kind of rebut those one at a time. I don't know if I'll get to 10, but I'll go through some of them. And if you're interested in these issues, this is a good thing to listen to understand what the arguments have been against us and what it is that we've used as far as logic and fact and reason and data to rebut those, which ultimately led to us being successful this year. Some of the arguments, we need a licensing system because it prevents dangerous criminals from carrying handguns. Okay. If you don't have a license to carry a handgun in Indiana, and you carry a handgun anyway, and you get caught, it's a Class A misdemeanor. That's a base offense. Now, it can be elevated if there are other issues there, if you have a felony conviction previously, or if you're on school property, that type of thing. But the base level offense is a Class A misdemeanor, punishable by up to 1 year in jail. So the people that tell you that a licensing system prevents dangerous criminals from carrying handguns are asking you to believe that someone who's not afraid of going to jail for murder, or rape, or armed robbery, for which they could do decades and decades in prison, or the death penalty with enough aggravating circumstances for murder, that these people are asking you to believe that someone who's not afraid of 60 years in prison is going to suddenly go, well, hold on, I want to go kill someone. I want to kill my rival drug dealer down at 30th and Sherman, but hold on, I better not take a handgun because I don't have a license to carry a handgun, and for that reason, the worst thing could ever happen to me is that year in jail for a Class A misdemeanor, and for that reason, I'm not going to take my handgun. People that tell you a licensing system prevents dangerous criminals from carrying handguns want you to believe that. How ridiculous is that? Ask any cop, ask any prosecutor, do criminals care about a license before they carry a handgun? And they will laugh at you and say, of course not. So that defies logic. It doesn't happen in terms of any criminal ever having been deterred, oh no, I better not carry a handgun because of a licensing system. And then we hear, well, police need to know who's armed, therefore we need a licensing system. Think that one through a moment. So hold on. So, okay, yes, when a police officer pulls over a vehicle, for instance, and they run the plate, they can see who the registered owner is. That, at that point, doesn't tell them anything about whether that person is licensed to have a handgun. But they can run the driver's license of the registered owner, and when you run a driver's license, that tells you whether, as an officer, whether that person has a license to carry a handgun. So at that point, yes, there is a time when you run a driver's license that a law enforcement officer is told that the person with a particular driver's license has a license to carry a handgun. All right. This is a person who's passed a background check, who's not a felon, not a domestic batterer. He's a law-abiding citizen. So we're telling police officers that a law-abiding citizen has a gun. Good. All right. What does that do in terms of informing an officer that a bad guy has a gun? What does it do as far as informing an officer that a dangerous criminal, a multiple-time felon, that person who is going to be the only one who's a danger to the officer, the law-abiding citizens who have license to carry, telling them that we have a gun is irrelevant because we're not a danger to the officers. There are statistics out there by the Crime Prevention Research Council, Dr. John Lott, that show that people who have a license to carry handgun generally commit less crimes than the cops do. So telling the cops who has a license is telling them who the law-abiding citizens are who may be armed. That's irrelevant to keeping those police officers safe. It doesn't tell them when the criminals have a gun. And for that very reason, police are trained to assume everybody's got a gun. They assume everybody's dangerous. They assume everyone's a threat to them until they verify they're not. That's how cops are trained. Ask any cop you know. You walk up to a car as part of a traffic stop, do you consider that person a potential threat until you verify they're not? Of course. That's how they're trained. There's a licensing system. Bear on that in any way? Absolutely not. It's a ridiculous argument. It's never made any sense. Notwithstanding that, you have folks like Superintendent Doug Carter who are out there coming to committee hearings, out there in public, going into media and saying, this will endanger our officers. What do you base that on? Well, we won't know who has a gun. Same argument we just went through. Well, we won't know if someone has a gun that they could be dangerous and therefore officers won't be able to protect themselves. Same argument. Doesn't make any damn sense. You assume everybody's dangerous. You assume everybody has a gun. That's how cops are trained. Well, someone can be prohibited from carrying and we won't know it. Well, why not? Get on the radio, get on your computer, and figure it out. What do you think the police are doing in the 21 other states? By the way, we became the 24th state with constitutional carry. Well, there were 21 before this year, and some have had it for years, decades. Vermont's had constitutional carry since there's been a Vermont. What do the police in those states do? Are they powerless to figure out who's lawful to carry a handgun? Superintendent Carter and Assistant Chief Christopher Bailey from IMPD is out there saying the same thing this last week, trying to convince Governor Holcomb to veto constitutional carry. Oh, well, we won't know who's legal. Well, I'm sorry. All that information is in an existing criminal history database. And it turns out, after the interviews by Assistant Chief Bailey hit the media, turns out Marion County, where IMPD obviously is based, just really sucks at keeping accurate and up-to-date databases based on who's convicted of what in Marion County. It turns out their systems are really antiquated and they're really bad at getting the right amount of information in their systems. So they're worried about not knowing who's a prohibited possessor on the side of the road. So the remedy to that, according to Assistant Chief Bailey, is to deprive law-abiding citizens of their constitutional rights because their systems are so out of whack, they can't figure out who's a dangerous criminal and who's not. Fix your systems, Assistant Chief Bailey. Fix the problem. You don't inhibit the constitutional rights of law-abiding citizens because Marion County has its head up its ass on doing what it needs to do to keep its systems up to date. Fix the problem. And don't lay that problem on law-abiding citizens' laps. That's inappropriate, it's wrong, it always has been. And oh, by the way, say, well, without a licensing system, we won't know who's a prohibited possessor. If somebody's pulled over in Marion County tonight and they've got a loaded AK-47 in the back seat, no license required to carry an AK-47, none whatsoever. Are you telling me that IMPD is powerless to figure out whether that person can lawfully possess that rifle or not? Are they just going to shrug their shoulders and send them on down the road? Or are they going to get on the radio and get on the computer and figure it out? Of course they are. That's what they've been doing since there's been rifles in vehicles, which is, a couple hundred years. So we're powerless to figure out who's a prohibited possessor. It's crap. It's bull. It's never been valid. And we've debunked it at every turn. And we've been successful, and that's why we got it done this year. But I keep hearing other things, and even by some gun owners. People say, oh, well, it'll destroy reciprocity. No, it won't. Do you need a license to carry a handgun to those states that recognize the Indiana license but require an out-of-state license? Yes. Oh, no, we'll have constitutional carry and the license is going away. No, it's not. No, it's not. The licenses that you and I have, my lifetime license, your 5-year license, your 4-year license, they're all going to remain valid for their term, whether it's your lifetime, 5 years, or 4 years. It says that right in the constitutional carry bill. We made sure that was in there. Okay, and ISP, Indiana State Police, will continue to issue licenses to new applicants, exactly as they have for years. You turn 18, you move to Indiana, you just decide you want a license, go apply online. State Police website, go through the same process, get your license. You want a license to carry to other states, good to go. Now, how does that exactly work? Because, by the way, 23 other states now have constitutional carry. So how's that work? In terms of states that have constitutional carry, and then other states have reciprocity, or it's the same states, and then us going to constitutional carry, how's all that work? Well, let me spell that out for you. There are 32 other states that recognize the Indiana license to carry handgun. Of those, 23 are now constitutional carry states. However, one, North Dakota, only recognizes constitutional carry for North Dakota residents. So, there are 10 states, okay, you following me so far, that require an Indiana license in order to allow Indiana residents to carry in those states. Okay, that's the 9 states that recognize our license and don't have constitutional carry, plus North Dakota that has constitutional carry but doesn't recognize it for out-of-state residents. So those 10 states. So 22 states that have constitutional carry, who also recognize our license, carry a handgun there. The 10 states that require us to have a license in their state, you need a license. For those 10 states, go down, apply, get your license. If you have a license, it remains valid. If you have a 5 years getting ready to expire, go apply for a new one. You're good to go. Constitutional carry has no effect whatsoever on reciprocity or carrying in another state. We're good. All right, was another argument. I saw one on social media here in the last couple of days. Somebody said, well, now a police officer will be empowered to simply walk up to you on the street if they see you with a handgun and investigate you to decide whether you're legal to have that handgun. No, that's not how that works. We know that's not how that works because we have an Indiana Supreme Court case from 2017, Pinner versus State, that says very specifically that the mere possession of a handgun or any firearm does not create what we call a reasonable articulable suspicion. That's the standard. To detain someone and investigate them on the street, police have to have that reasonable suspicion of criminal activity in order to detain someone. In the Pinner case from 2017, very important, and this was a big issue as we debated constitutional carry in the Indiana General Assembly. Okay. The Supreme Court said, no, the mere possession of a handgun does not allow police to detain that person and investigate whether their possession of that gun is lawful. If we have a handgun licensing requirement, which we're going to have right up until July 1 this year, okay, that means they can't stop someone and say, excuse me, I need to see your license. Now, a person can always have what we call a consensual encounter with law enforcement officer. A person can always, respond. Police officer says, excuse me, guy, see you're carrying a handgun. I am. It's my new SIG 229 Legion SAO. I'm really proud of this handgun. Thanks for noticing. Well, guy, I need to see your license. No, thank you, officer. Don't care to show that to you. I can walk right on down the street. If they detain me, that's a violation of my Fourth Amendment rights against unreasonable searches and seizures. Okay. However, we can always have, as I say, a consensual encounter. What does that allow me to do? Or allow police officers? They can say, excuse me, guy, notice that really attractive SIG 229 Legion SAO on your hip. Would love to know whether you have a license. I can say, sure, officer. I'd be glad to show you because I'm consenting to that encounter. Totally legal. But they can't detain me. Because constitutional carry. Does the governor's signing of House Bill 1296, and ultimately when it goes into effect July 1st this year, does that have any effect whatsoever on that whole process? Absolutely not. If it wasn't lawful to detain me to investigate whether my possession of a gun was legal before constitutional carry, nothing in constitutional carry changes that whatsoever. So don't listen to that one when you see folks out waving their hand. I've seen people say things like, well, it creates a whole new category of prohibited possessors, and people can go to jail for being prohibited possessors when they couldn't before. No, that's wrong. In fact, it's better than it used to be in that context, because there are several categories, for instance, of prohibited possessors under federal law, where if you get caught with a handgun, oh, I'm getting some kind of a message from Facebook that my frame rate is too low. So I don't know, you people have to bounce back to me and tell me how you feel about how this is coming across and how good it is, because Facebook is telling me there's something wrong with the broadcast. So I don't know, something to look into if we do this again. But what the hell was the issue I was just talking about? See, I'm having a senior moment. I distracted myself. Well, Facebook distracted me. But what the hell? All right, well, let's keep going. The other potential problems that, oh, I know, additional categories of prohibited possessors. Okay, see, it came back to me. No, in fact, it's better than it used to be, because there are several categories, for instance, under federal law, that if you get caught with a gun and you violate that federal law because you're a prohibited possessor and you still have a gun, you can go to federal prison for 10 years. Okay? In Indiana, what we did is we're doing away with the crime of carrying a handgun without a license. Okay? That's not going to exist anymore. However, because some people aren't able to exercise constitutional carry, and as we've said all along, if you're a prohibited possessor before, you're still a prohibited possessor. Then what we've done is we've created this new category called possession of a handgun by a prohibited possessor. Okay? And what we've done is we've recreated that list of people who are not eligible to possess a firearm under federal law and Indiana law. However, for almost all of those categories, except for like serious violent felons and a few other, being on school property, except for just a couple very few exceptions, that's only a Class A misdemeanor under Indiana laws. This actually gives law enforcement an opportunity to prosecute those folks, and they'd be subject to a much lower penalty than they would have before, because the only option then was to prosecute them under federal law, and they could get 10 years in prison as opposed to 1 year in prison under this new category we have in Indiana. That was vital, by the way. I can see somebody saying, well, I don't like that. I don't like these categories of prohibited possessors. Okay, I get it. There was no way we were going to get this signed into law. And I can tell you, Exhibit A, establishing that, is the governor's statement that came out Monday after he signed this thing. He says, very important to note that anybody who was a prohibited possessor before is still a prohibited possessor. If that wasn't in this bill, however you feel about that provision, it was never going to get signed into law. And that's been the experience of virtually every other constitutional carry state as well that's gotten it done. You can't get this done because the biggest argument against us is, oh my gosh, you idiots are going to allow bad guys to carry guns in public. And if you allow that to be a winning argument, you're not going to get constitutional carry passed. Simple truth. And that, again, Exhibit A, Governor Holcomb came out and said, I signed this because. I said, well, the Supreme Court's reaffirmed Second Amendment rights. We want to support constitutional rights in Indiana. And oh, by the way, this doesn't allow anybody who's a prohibited possessor to carry a handgun. If you're a prohibited possessor before, you're a prohibited possessor afterward. That was critically important. This was never going to get passed without that. Do we create a whole new category of prohibited possessors? Absolutely not. We mirrored those categories of prohibited possessors that already exist and put a hell of a lot lower penalty on it. Now again, Second Amendment purists out there will say, well, I don't like that. Any gun law is an infringement of my rights. I get all of that, brother. I get it. But that's a much different discussion than whether or not you can get a bill passed. Is any bill that ever gets passed in a General Assembly, in my mind, perfect? No. But you do what you do to get the law better than it was before. And in this case, I don't know if I want to call constitutional carry holy grail. That's a term that gets thrown around a lot. I don't know. I aim high, man. There's more things we can do that may be as important or more important to gun rights in Indiana. The reason I formed the 2A project, we're not going anywhere. But this is a big one, and we wouldn't have gotten this done if we hadn't have gone down that road, but it's better than it used to be. Okay, so the whole idea, well, you created, prohibited possessors that didn't exist before. No, we didn't. We mirrored the existing list of prohibited possessors and put a hell of a lot lower penalty on it. Because, again, we're exercising a constitutional right. But, at the end of the day, that's really why we won this fight. Because of grassroots involvement. Again, I formed the 2A project 2 years ago. And I said, you can go to the website, the2aproject.com, and you'll see one of the principal goals is to get constitutional carry passed. We're not done by a long shot. There's a lot more to do. And we've got to continue to play defense, by the way, because we're going to continue to see assault weapon ban, high-capacity magazine ban, safe storage laws that tell you how to store a gun in your own home. We're going to continue to play defense. We're going to continue to play offense, too. We didn't get our defensive property bill that would have allowed someone to point a gun at someone and say, no, you're not going to throw that Molotov cocktail through the window of my business, for example. Wendy McNamara from Evansville, Republican, wouldn't give us a hearing on that in the House. 2 years in a row, Wendy. After it sailed through the Senate, not okay. Not okay. So we're going to, well, actually, this year it went through the House first and went to her committee. Last year it sailed through the Senate and went to her. Neither time did she give it a committee hearing. Not okay. Not all right. You want to be a Republican? You want to campaign on the Second Amendment? You want to fundraise on the Second Amendment? Oh, hell no. And the idea of holding politicians accountable for their votes. Now, look, you always got a decision to make. When a Republican stabs you in the back, like Mike Bohatchik did in the Judiciary Committee, when he not only voted to gut constitutional carry out of the original constitutional carry bill and substitute something completely different, that's not all he did. That's not all he did. And that's not all Liz Brown did. Those two also voted in an amendment to constitutional carry. Not enough people are talking about this. In an amendment to constitutional carry, Liz Brown and Mike Bohatchik voted to strip most of the due process out of our red flag statute. Had nothing to do with constitutional carry. I guess they both involve guns. But they voted for an amendment, and this is being pushed by the Marion County prosecutor, Ryan Mears, as an excuse, by the way, for why he didn't red flag the FedEx shooter. So, oh, no, it's not my fault. It's because it's a defective statute. I'm sorry. You can't complain about your bat if you're a baseball player when you never took it off your shoulder and took a swing. They never tried to red flag this guy. They said, oh, well, because there's defect in the statute. And what we need to do is as soon as a judge finds probable cause that someone's dangerous, then they ought to become a prohibited possessor where they lose all their Second Amendment rights, where they've had no due process whatsoever. The court has never heard from them. They've heard one side of the argument from a cop, from somebody complaining, somebody alleging this person's dangerous. The person's had no due process whatsoever, no ability to defend themselves. And Mike Bohatchik and Liz Brown, two Republicans, voted to amend constitutional carry this year to make that happen, to strip due process out of the red flag law. The red flag law can already be abused. I know, I defend those cases. And two Republicans voted to strip due process out of it. That's not okay. Those same two voted to make Indiana a so-called universal background check state. This is as an amendment to constitutional carry. Universal background checks. That's a backdoor, and everybody knows this. The Obama administration admitted this. I have the memo from the Department of Justice. It says universal background checks are unenforceable without universal registration. How do you feel about the government having a list of every firearm you own as a condition of you being able to own it? And oh, by the way, universal background checks are completely unenforceable. First of all, without universal registration, now, well, that would apply to law-abiding citizens. You think the two drug dealers, some guy swapping a Glock 19 for a bag of crack in an alley somewhere because the one wants to go kill his rival drug dealer, are they going to stop in the middle of that transaction and go, hold on, Liz Brown and Mike Bohatchik just pioneered this new bill that requires a universal background check, so I can't give you this gun in exchange for that crack. Are you kidding? You think criminals care about universal background checks? It's ridiculous. Two Republicans, Mike Bohatchik, Liz Brown, voted for that amendment. I take my word for it. It's on the video. It's in the archives. It's on the Indiana General Assembly website. Don't forget about these things. And that's another reason why we formed the 2A Project. I'm going to hold these people accountable. I'm going to hold them accountable. Now, sometimes between the devil and the deep blue sea, in the sense of, well, what we're going to do, we're going to vote for Democrats? Well, I'll tell you this right now. My personal opinion, and I'm not going to endorse any particular candidate, support any particular candidate, but if we had a Democrat win District 15 in Fort Wayne and defeat Liz Brown, so we go from 39 to 11 as far as the supermajority of Republicans in the Senate to 38 to 12, and we get Liz Brown off the Judiciary Committee as chair, where every 2A bill goes to die because she despises your Second Amendment rights? Tell me who cares at all about Second Amendment rights at all wouldn't take that deal. Look, I'm not out to support Democrats. Oh, hell no. But at least we know where they're coming from. And at the same time, when we can get someone off a powerful position, because by the way, if Liz Brown gets beat in her next election, the Democrat who beats her doesn't get her committee chair. That's not how that works. Republican leadership replaces her with some other Republican. And by the way, if you're a member of Senate leadership, you get forwarded this video, you hear about it, you're watching it live, Liz Brown needs to go as chairman of the Judiciary Committee. Republican leadership had to go around her, and I praise you for doing it. You're heroes for doing this. Strong leaders, and I give credit where credit is due. But you had to go around Liz Brown after she gutted constitutional carry, even though the caucus wanted to give it a vote on the floor of the Senate. Not okay. Not okay. So we kept defeating all these arguments. We were able to defeat and survive Superintendent Doug Carter coming to that Judiciary Committee and wagging his finger at the Judiciary Committee members saying, if you support this bill, you don't support law enforcement. And I'll be honest, I've said this on WIBC, I'll say it here. I think that was the moment when we actually, we had a bit of a sea change at that moment. And it wasn't the sea change Superintendent Carter was looking for. What he expected is to everyone to kowtow to him. And some of the senators on the Judiciary Committee clearly did, because Sue Glick then joined Mike Bohatchik and Liz Brown and voted for the amendment to gut constitutional carry out. So he had his effect in the Judiciary Committee. But I think the broader effect that he didn't think about was how Senate leadership was going to react to that, because too many senators and too many representatives heard that and said, oh, hell no. No, I support law enforcement. I support the blue. I stand with the blue, and I can still stand with the constitutional rights of my constituents. And I think that pushed that pendulum so far to one direction, and this was a miscalculation by Superintendent Carter, who, by the way, I've said it before, I'll say it again, I like Doug Carter as a human being. I think he's been an effective superintendent for a lot of years. His people who run the licensing division are fabulous. I work with them every day. They're highly skilled, hardworking people. So I've got a lot of respect for a lot of these folks. But the miscalculation, because he couldn't support his factual claims. This is going to endanger police officers. What's your support for that? Here's 21 other states with constitutional carry, Superintendent. Where's the data that shows us this endangers police officers? Doesn't exist. Going to endanger the general public. All right, same question. Show me the data. Doesn't exist. Then when he said you can't support constitutional carry and support law enforcement, a whole bunch of people in the Indiana General Assembly said, oh, hell no. Not okay. Not okay. And that's when they pushed back. And I believe that's when Senate leadership, including President Pro Tem Senator Rod Bray said, no, we're going to get this thing a hearing. We're going to get it a vote on the floor of the Senate, to be accurate. And I think that's when we got it done. So we did. We got all that done. Who do we have to thank? You know, we know who the villains are, right? Liz Brown, right out in front of the list, man. She went to the podium. I said it earlier. She went to the podium 3 times in that 3-hour debate on the Senate floor to go so over the top. Again, wagging her finger. I support the blue. You don't support the blue. Excuse me? There's no data to support that. And by the way, the blue, or law enforcement, I got to tell you, I've learned something over the years, and this could not be more true, and that is there's the rank and file, there's the officer on the street, there are the political appointees. There are the elected sheriffs. We're talking about who we have to thank. Well, I'm going to get right there, let me tell you. But the folks who oppose constitutional carry are invariably, as law enforcement, political appointees. Working for a liberal mayor, Fort Wayne, Bloomington, South Bend. That's who we heard from, right? Heard from Superintendent Carter, and that's why we were nervous about a potential veto from Governor Holcomb, because who's he work for? Governor Holcomb. He's on the cabinet. Governor Holcomb's his boss. Superintendent Carter doesn't show up to these hearings and say the things he says in the media without having his boss's endorsement. Do I think Eric Holcomb would have preferred this thing died in the Senate? Yes, I do. I believe that. Okay. But I can't put him on the villain list as the governor. Why? Because he signed it. He didn't veto it. Did we have the votes lined up to override a veto? I think so. But was the leadership in both the House and the Senate willing to go there? I can't say I was 100% certain on that. That's why I was nervous about a veto. But let's move away from our antagonists and our opposition and folks that I think need to be held politically accountable. Let's move over to who we have to thank. And I've started down this road already. But elected law enforcement who came in to support this, right at the top of the list, I put Sheriff Dennis Quakenbush from Hamilton County. I'm sitting in Hamilton County right now. I'm in my office in Carmel. And this guy's a hero. And you know what? Hamilton County is not completely homogenous in terms of political views. You know, there are a lot of people who are not going to be happy in Hamilton County that Dennis Quakenbush, as elected sheriff, came in and supported constitutional carry. I think the vast majority of people in Hamilton County are going to see him for the hero that he is and someone who supports your constitutional rights. And we're going to absolutely support him in his bid for re-election here this year. And because he's a law enforcement official, unlike some of the others I just mentioned, who was willing to come in and fight for your constitutional rights in the Indiana General Assembly. That's a big deal. That's a big deal. And he's an elected representative. A recently retired sheriff from Hancock County came in. The elected sheriff from Martin County came in. And that was a big deal. Because, you know, everybody wants to say law enforcement opposes this. No, not all law enforcement. The rank and file and elected sheriffs, in my view, invariably supported your constitutional rights, supported constitutional carry. Who opposed it? Political appointees from liberal jurisdictions. Is that a shock? Of course not. But then you had the legislators themselves, man. And again, you know, this year it starts with Representative Ben Smalls from Auburn. But man, Representative Jim Lucas, and I consider both those guys really good friends. We haven't scheduled our celebration dinner, but that one's going to be epic. But Jim's been fighting this for years and years, as has Ben. And then this year, Ben took the laboring war and put together, I think, a really outstanding bill. He worked with a lot of us to make that bill the best it could be. Then you had Matt Lehman in the House. You had Representative Peggy Mayfield, Representative Jerry Torr. You've had these folks who have been right there at every turn. And Representative Jerry Torr is he's always the adult in the room. You know, when a lot of the rest of us, you know, want to get upset or frustrated or whatever, Jerry is that calm, deliberate, wise influence that helps get things done. We probably wouldn't have got my self-defense immunity bill that we passed in 2019. I say my because I wrote it. I probably wouldn't have gotten that the legislature, probably would not have gotten that passed in 2019 without Jerry Toole, because things started to blow up a little bit. There was disagreement between the House and the Senate. Jerry stepped in and made it happen, and his leadership on constitutional carry was absolutely invaluable. And a lot more. Then over in the Senate, and we've had such a fight in the Senate, we forget we have real friends over there. And I mentioned Eric Cook, Aaron Freeman. His rebuttal to Doug Carter on the floor of the Senate during the debate on 1296, right before it went to a vote, was one of the most powerful things that happened to us this whole fight, this legislative session. He looked right at Doug Carter and said, let me tell you about my law enforcement background. Let me tell you about how I feel about supporting law enforcement. Don't tell me that I can't support law enforcement and support this bill. And it was powerful. And I'm sure it had an effect. I'm sure it swayed votes. And Jim Toms, he's authored some of the most important 2A legislation we have in Indiana. Our preemption statute is huge. Before he was even in the Senate, he worked to get us a lifetime license. And we were the first state in the country to have a lifetime license. I think there are only 2 now, if my information is still correct. And those folks went to bat, man. And see, there's what you see on the video and hearings, and then there's what goes on in the hallways and having meetings and meeting with leadership and going to caucus. Again, you've heard me complain about what happens in caucus, and I'll continue to do so because too many decisions get made out of the public eye. But because that process, as flawed as it is, continues to exist, you got to know who's on your side and in there fighting to get things done, even in those caucus meetings. So all those folks, we owe a huge debt of gratitude. Again, I'll say it again, John Weber from NRA, his boss, Chris Kopacki, and Chris Conti back at NRA, ILA. Those folks have been fighting hard, man. I know, because I see it. We're on the ridiculous conference calls at 6 a.m. and midnight and all that stuff. That's been going on for years. Those folks are right in there swinging. So to all those folks, man, I say thank you. I hope we were able to give you some chronology and some background. And the last person I'm going to thank, and I know he's not popular on a lot of other issues with a lot of his fellow Republicans, but Governor Holcomb stepped up and signed this thing. And his wife, Janet Holcomb, is a huge Second Amendment supporter. She's an NRA certified firearms district. And I don't know, I certainly don't know what the discussions are between Janet and Eric. But if I had to guess, I think our First Lady had a positive influence here as well. And I hope so, because I have an immeasurable respect for her. Upsets me a little bit when she kicks my ass shooting sporting clays, because she's really good. But in the meantime, Governor Holcomb stepped up and he signed it. And you know what? For those of us concerned about 2A rights, I'm going to give him credit where credit is due. I'm not going to forget the people who did what we asked them to do, because we, in fact, asked Governor Holcomb to sign it, and he did. And I got to tell you, too, I felt good about the communications we had with him. After Assistant Chief Christopher Bailey came out and had his op-ed in the Indy Star saying, it's going to endanger police officers, I did a point-by-point rebuttal of his op-ed, submitted that to the Indy Star, and of course the cowards at the Indy Star would not publish my rebuttal. They only want to publish one side of the argument. That's how far down the drain the Indy Star has gone. But I converted that to a letter to the governor and had that hand delivered. And by the way, we also need to help to thank, by the way, the Indiana State Rifle and Pistol Association and Charlie Hiltunen, their president, Sue Mogul, their vice president, because they were awesome. And the ISRPA actually helped me get my letter hand delivered to Governor Holcomb before he made the decision to either sign or veto it. And his announcement, announcing not only that he'd signed the bill, but why. And again, I can't take credit. I don't know, because a lot of this information came from a lot of other sources. He went point by point by point, write down what we had said in our letter for why all the opposition to constitutional carry was off base. So ISRPA is someone else who we owe a huge debt of gratitude to, and I'm sure there are others that I've forgotten. But lastly, I'll tell you who I want to thank, and that is grassroots, man. That's to every single one of us. And at 2A Project members, man, we were right out front. That's why I formed a 2A Project. But the people who called, the people who emailed, the people who showed up, that's another reason why I formed 2A Project. We need you in those rooms, man. When these things go to a hearing, when all the moms demand action people show up in their red T-shirts, and they're in there booing and hissing and or clapping for their people, whatever. It makes a difference. This year, we showed up. We showed up. We showed up. We were polite. We were respectful. We were armed to the teeth with information and data and logic. And we presented the data, but we showed up. We showed up with emails. We showed up with phone calls. We showed up in committee hearings. And when people showed up with their 2A Project t-shirts on, man, that warmed my heart like you can't believe. And it's not over. We got to play defense, got to play offense. A lot of things we still need to accomplish in the General Assembly. But the grassroots participation, man, more than anything, I thank you folks. Because you know what? I mean, you know, I'm not getting paid to do this, but you know what? Neither are you. When you're sending those emails, you're sending those. I get paid to have a radio show on WIBC. But that's it on the legislative side. But neither do you. And you in terms of participating in the process. And at the end of the day, not get too much on my soapbox, that's what makes this the greatest system of government on earth. It's a participative democracy. You get to show up. You get to make your voice heard. And at the state level, man, there are a bunch of opportunities to do that. Committee hearings, emails, phone calls, and we showed up. We showed up. I'm really proud of the 2A Project and our members. Really proud of everybody who fought for Second Amendment rights, and we got it done. We got it done. And so I wanted to have this discussion. It's a little different than being live on the radio, but I wanted to come do this. For those of you who popped on here to see this live or see it as posted on the video on the Facebook page later, and I'll post links around where I can as soon as I figure that technology out. But to everybody who participated in this process, man, we all owe a toast to each other, a pat on the back, and if you're into it, a nice cigar, because a lot of folks didn't think we'd ever get to where we are right now, which is Indiana being the 24th constitutional carry state. I certainly had my doubts throughout the process, but I was always the one in there swinging, along with a whole bunch of other people who were in there swinging, and we got it done, and that feels good. And now we all deserve to celebrate a little bit. So thank you, and thanks for joining me here. I'm going to sign off. I haven't gone down through the comments and questions. If there's things there that I can respond to offline, I'll do that. Right now, I had a goal of not going any longer than an hour, so we'll end this. And with that, man, God bless you, and good night.